name is Alicia Wright, and I am a comic fantasy author of a fantasy comic that's also comic fantasy. If you've been hanging around on my channel, or if you haven't, you might have seen my Vampires Don't Belong in Fairytales comic dub videos hanging around, and what is that? What's that about? Who are these people? That's what I'm going to explain to you today. Because I realized that over on DA, people have a lot of information on these characters, and on YouTube you have zero context. So this is my video trying to fix that. Here we go. My first protagonist is Lucinda. She's an Earthling teen who gets a job working as a prince for an agency that fixes stories. They normally hire real ones, but the real ones tend to run off and get married to the first princess that they rescue, and then they become kings, and kings don't rescue people. Kings tend to die when they try to rescue people, so they usually just sit around and have their daughters kidnapped. So Lucinda gets the job in the first place by accident. Sarah, who's her boss, was expecting an otherworlder to turn up, not some Earth girl. But you work with what you got. Lucinda applied because she's a huge weeb and she wanted to go to a convention with her friends, and dragons couldn't stop her, which is a good job because she's gonna have to fight some. Also a vampire overlord. The title of the series, Vampires Don't Belong in Fairytales, is actually originally the tagline of Lucinda's book, which is Misprints. The webcomics, also a book series, just FYI. I think what most people assume, however, is that this is a reference to my next protagonist, Tyrion von Stollenheim. Tyrion is a fairy king who is also a vampire. Fairyland is a little weird in that it's 3 kingdoms that function as one kingdom. I suppose it's not that strange by today's standards, but there are 3 realms: light, dark, and wild. Fairies are very straight with their names. They'll straight up call a place the Forest of Doom or something, like they don't mess about. Each of the 3 realms has their own royal family and bloodline, but they do consider themselves to be one family. Tyrion was made regent king 4 years ago when his parents went missing. He doesn't like it. His sister went missing, his aunt went missing. A lot of royals have gone conveniently missing in the last 7 years. Then the country collapsed into civil war. I promise that it is funnier than it sounds. Not so much the civil war as some of the other stuff. Having said that, you won't see any of that war stuff in the webcomic because it's not very funny in itself, and I'm writing comedy. So what comic readers get are the shenanigans that happened surrounding his employment of and crush on his fool William Winters, our next protagonist. Will is the protagonist of Fairy Roots. Will comes from Stratford-upon-Avon. Yep, the one on Earth in England. That place Shakespeare is from. But his mother comes from a place called Harforth on Anima. Anima is one of the 3 magical planets, the others being Gaia and Calypso. Will's mother moved to Earth because Harforth has a history of monster attacks. Stratford-upon-Avon has a population of otherworlders in it, so she moved there to get away from all that monster stuff. She told Will all about his fairy heritage, though. He's like 1/16 of a fairy. It's not a big deal, but you don't just let my great-great-grandmother was a fairy changeling pass as a story to tell your kids. She told Will about how Fairyland was a dangerous place full of monsters, and it was really no way to discourage a small boy from wanting to go there. During his teen years, Will has been backpacking and searching for otherworld doors, doing research, almost getting killed that one time when he tried to go and walk into Fairyland with very little research. He lands himself a job as court jester / fool for Tyrion, and stuff happens. Another protagonist that you'll see in the first couple of videos is Victor. Victor is another Stollenheim. There's a lot of them. They're a family of nobles and vampires and spotlight stealers. If there's a Stollenheim around, they're gonna be like one of the main characters or the protagonists. It's just what they do. They try and put them in like a secondary role and they're just like inching their way up there. But yeah, if there's a Stollenheim in the story, even if I don't intend them to be important, they end up being. It's just how it has happened for 6 books. Victor is a painfully shy and repressed teen, and that's just about as bad for a vampire as you expect that it is. His mother has drilled into him a fear of humans and the world in general after his father was killed by a mob for being a traditional vampire. After being impressed by Tyrion at a family wedding, Victor decides to move to Fairyland to overcome his shyness, with some assistance of Contessa von Stallenheim, the family matriarch, which his mother is not impressed by. It's not a good idea, but it's the best idea they got. Later on, Victor is followed to Fairyland by his favorite cousin Hetty. Hetty loves the heck out of manga and doesn't think much of all this vampire business lurking around in castles on balconies and what have you, and so she wants to be the Otherworld's first magical girl. You see, vampire isn't so much of a condition or a species. It's not a species, it's a condition, but people think of it as a species. But it's not so much of a description as it is a job description, so she's gonna be a magical girl instead. The other worlds don't know what that is, but that's not gonna stop Hetty, so I have two other protagonists who don't show up much in the comics for a couple of different reasons. First, there's Joshua. Joshua is my unluckiest protagonist. By a country mile. He gets stuck in a story for being nice to a mysterious beggar lady, which sees him stranded on a planet that's mostly ocean and at the mercy of pirates and aggressive mermaids. But whereas I can put Tyrion in a room by himself and he'll do something funny or something funny will happen, Joshua is like a quiet merchant son who does not want any of this nonsense, and he's not really comedy material. That's the reason you don't see him very much. He's not very funny in and of himself. My last and newest protagonist is Zarin, a young royal from a country neighboring Sheva. That's where Sarah is from. Their country has been invaded by a neighboring empire that's going around doing that sort of thing. They've been drafted into service for the emperor, who has also incapacitated their youngest sibling. Traditionally, the youngest of three siblings is the one that tends to go and succeed at stuff like overthrowing evil empires and stuff, so they're taking precautions. And they've also demanded Zarin's older sister Zaranthia as their bride, so there's a lot going on. So Zarin's current predicament is trying to serve the emperor while trying to figure out what to do about their sisters being in peril. I'm only 2 chapters into their story at the minute, so I don't have a good feel for them. They're also not exactly in a comedy situation right now, so that's why you won't see them very much either. But, as I develop the story, hopefully they can turn up, because I do really like them so far. Those are the Vampires Don't Belong in Fairytales protagonists. If you haven't seen the comic dub yet, if you're interested, I have the first 2 arcs of the comic dub all up and posted here on YouTube. And there's about 150 comics posted over on DA to keep you amused. Vampires Don't Belong in Fairytales, as I mentioned, is also the name of my comic fantasy YA book series that runs alongside the comic. I originally started the comics as a way to get ideas about the books out of my head, but it turns out that it's its own thing, and it's actually really good for like character development and world building and stuff like that, because I can do that outside the book without boring the reader. So it's good for like working out details that I can then put in the book. But it's mostly just a thing for fun. There are 5 Vampires Don't Belong in Fairytales books so far. I think I said 6. Are there 6? No, there's 5. I lied earlier. There's 5. It's a really fun series to work with, so I've picked my lane, and I'm sticking to it right now. I've been writing this series for about 10 years now, and I have no plans to stop anytime soon. If you got this far in the video, thanks so much for listening, and thanks for watching my videos.